Welcome to the Bywords Show. I'm your host, Hannah Hughes. Bywords is all about equipping women for purposeful living by starting conversations, celebrating stories, and inspiring faith. In a world that applauds the hustle, I'm here to help you break free from the lies and come back to what really matters. It's time to get real, get rooted in truth, and come alive in relationship with Jesus so you can show up to each day with intention and confidence no matter where you're at in your story. Here we believe that embracing our stories brings hope, healing, and purpose to the process, and sharing our stories helps others do the same. Whether you're looking for a midweek faith refresh, practical tools for pursuing your dreams, or just need some good old-fashioned girl talk, you're in the right place. Grab your latte and let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Bywords Show. Today is the day. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. Hope you're in for it. I am so excited to share this interview that my friend Molly Wilcox did for her podcast called Holy Labor, all about birth trauma and navigating unexpected plans through motherhood, pregnancy, all the in between. And I just loved this conversation. I was so honored to be a part of this project that she did. And so she, in her podcast, Holy Labor, splits up part of our interview to share in all of the different topics she covers in each episode. But she shared our interview that I wanted to be able to just share in one place here for you so that you can hear kind of my own journey, as well as the thoughts that Molly adds, because she has just an incredible story through her own experience with pregnancy and birth trauma and motherhood and all of those things. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you want more, you got to go listen to her podcast, Holy Labor. It is so good. I'll make sure it's linked for you guys in the show notes. And without further ado, enjoy.
Okay, perfect. So do you want to just share a little bit about who you are and kind of your background coming to the conversation about birth trauma, pregnancy, all the things?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Molly. I'm Hannah Hughes. I am an author and podcaster, mom, wearing a lot of hats. And I love working with women to help them really refine and get clear on what they believe their purpose is, and then walking that out intentionally by setting goals or, creating rhythms for their life, that kind of thing. And it's been really interesting seeing how that has evolved in my own life through the journey of motherhood and pregnancy and all the things, which I know we'll get into, but that's kind of where I'm at for now.
That was going to be my next question. So I'd love for you to share. And I know we never talked about your son's birth either. So if you want to share pieces of that as well.
Okay, so I'll start at the beginning because I have experienced so much in my experience with pregnancy and birth and all of it. But in 2019, I got pregnant with my son, Jude, which is our first pregnancy. And I was so excited. I was clueless. I was a first time mom going into this with some expectations and kind of had an idea of what I hoped it would be like. I was planning for a natural, unmedicated home birth. I had a midwife and a doula. They were incredible. They were both believers as well. And it was just such a sweet experience. And having that support really made it amazing. Like, I couldn't have asked for anything better. Right around, I'd say, the middle or end of the second trimester of that pregnancy, I developed cholestasis, which is a liver malfunction basically in pregnancy. And it was horrendous. It was so awful. I was already having a few weird symptoms, like preeclamptic symptoms, but it was never definitive that that's what it was. But then I started the itching. And if you're not familiar with cholestasis, basically your liver leaks bile into your bloodstream and it makes you itchy, but it's an internal itch. And so there's nothing you can do about it really. And so I wasn't sleeping. I was itching all night long. I was so uncomfortable. And then getting into the third trimester, my son flipped breech at 37 weeks. So at that point, my midwife recommended transferring care to a hospital. So my plans for an unmedicated home birth went out the window. And I then transferred to a hospital birth with a scheduled C-section. So it was not at all what I wanted or hoped for. But honestly, at that point, I was just done being pregnant. I was so disappointed in the way that my plans just went complete opposite direction of what I had hoped. And first time moms just, I feel like, love the research side of things. And for me, it was so empowering to learn all the things. And one of the resources somebody had given to me was the pregnancy book, the spiritual pregnancy book, where it's just prayers over your pregnancy. I don't remember the name of it right now.
Supernatural Childbirth.
Yes. So I was reading that and I was like claiming the scriptures, doing the prayers, reading all the things. And I just felt really disappointed. And, at the end of the day, I just wanted our son to be healthy. And, at the end, it kind of got a little scary because with cholestasis, it can very quickly go from we're doing okay to now it's emergent. And so we ended up delivering him at like 39 weeks. So it wasn't anything crazy. But after I had him, postpartum was a little bit traumatic as well. I ended up having eclamptic symptoms postpartum with him. So I had high blood pressure, migraines. I was in and out of the hospital. And I just felt like I couldn't catch a break. And I was like, I'm just ready for this to be over. When do I get to experience the bliss that all these new moms talk about? And thankfully, things got resolved. And I was so grateful to the Lord, like having the support of my midwife and doula. They were able to be in the operating room with me during the C-section. They were with me all through recovery. And that was amazing. So I feel like it was as good as it could have been. And at the time, like freshly having our son, I was just grateful. Like I didn't feel traumatized necessarily. I felt just more disappointed and I felt really just bummed that things didn't work out the way that I hoped they would, but also accepting like, okay, well, that's how it goes. You can make the plans with pregnancy and childbirth, but at the end of the day, it's really out of our control. Like you can do all the right things on paper with eating the right things, taking all the supplements, going to all your appointments, but you just never know. It's just kind of a wild card, pregnancy and childbirth, but our son was healthy and that's all that mattered. So went about life as normal. And by the time he was 1, I would say we started thinking about having another baby. And at that point, I was like kind of starting to get my stride in motherhood. It was, 2020, so we were all at home. And during that time, it was it was a cool time in my life because I started brainstorming and really putting action behind my dreams for Bywords, my community, and now podcast. And having my son for that really to me gave me an experience with motherhood that I didn't expect, but I really was so grateful for. Like it gave me this new sense of weight and purpose to like, wow, like the way that I'm living is modeling for my kids how we pursue God's will for our life and the dreams He has for us, all of those kinds of things. So it kind of lit a fire in me to do that. And around that same time, we started talking about having another baby. So from there, got pregnant in 2021, I believe. And I had my first appointment. At that time, my midwife had moved away. So I was trying to decide, okay, well, with my complications in the last pregnancy, it's usually the thing where, like they usually say with subsequent pregnancies that there's a higher likelihood that you will have complications. So I talked to my midwife and said, okay, would you recommend me finding another midwife or should I just transfer to hospital care for this one going forward? And, finally found an OB in a hospital that I went to and she was excellent. So I had my first appointment with her at 7 weeks for our second pregnancy and heard the heartbeat and, it was just normal. Like everything was normal. And I didn't think anything of it. I went to that appointment by myself. And then she was like, well, I'm measuring a little small. So come back in 2 weeks. We'll measure again. And then we'll be able to move forward and figure out, birth plan. What do you want to do for this pregnancy coming from, different plans last time and all of that. So 2 weeks later, I went into my appointment and everything was going as planned. Everything was normal. And when we were looking for the heartbeat, we couldn't find it. So I was told then that we had lost our baby. And, I was just there by myself. And what nobody talks about with miscarriage is that you go into the office with this baby and this pregnancy and you're expecting everything to be fine, especially if you've had a pregnancy before that was fine. I mean, I had complications with my son, but we had a healthy, for the most part, pregnancy and delivery, and our son is healthy. So it's the last thing I expected. And I remember just crying with my doctor, and she said she was so sorry. And then I had to walk out into the waiting room past all the other pregnant moms and go home and tell my husband that we lost our baby and then go on being a mom. Like life doesn't pause. I was still a mom to this toddler. And this is to me where the trauma really started because no one prepares you for a miscarriage. Like you don't learn about it until it happens to you that you don't know. And so at that point, I was still carrying this baby that we had lost. I hadn't miscarried yet, but we had lost the baby. And so then my doctor was calling to ask me like, hey, what do you want to do? Here's your options. You can take a pill to basically start labor and deliver. You can have a D&C, which would be a last resort basically, which was the medical procedure. And or you can just wait and see if your body delivers it naturally. And I was like, well, no one should have to make that decision. None of them sound good to me. So I guess I'll just watch and wait because they all sound bad. So from the day of learning we had miscarried, it was 2 weeks that passed where I was just waiting to actually miscarry. And it was the worst experience. I remember we were going to the zoo for our son's second birthday. We pulled into the parking lot, parked the car, we were getting out, and felt, I just started bleeding and I knew it was happening. So we ran into the zoo. I remember like going in the bathroom and just crying and doing what I could to clean myself up and then go meet our family for our son's birthday party. And there's nothing you can do. You just let it happen. You just let your body do what it needs to do. From there, I, had that experience of bleeding for a few days and then it should be over with. But once my bleeding had stopped, I went for like a day of, normalcy. And then the next day I started bleeding, but really, really heavy. I called my doctor. Turns out I was hemorrhaging. I had to go to the ER. Christopher, my husband, was at work. So I went with my mom to the ER. My dad was watching our son. And we waited in the ER for 5 hours. And it was the worst pain of my life because not only you're basically delivering, you're like in labor, like you're cramping. I had really bad back labor pains, but I hadn't been seen by a doctor yet. So they couldn't give me any medication. They couldn't do anything to help me. I was just literally sitting there going to the bathroom every like 3 to 5 minutes because it was horrible. I was just like hemorrhaging in the waiting room basically. Then I was seen by a doctor, a male doctor, and it was, it wasn't an OB. It was a regular ER doctor. And this was after I finally was taken up to get a sonogram, like a vaginal ultrasound, and so like that was the most painful experience of my life, but they're just making sure that everything is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Then I go into the room with this doctor who's explaining, okay, looks like everything is fine. You're not anemic, like you haven't lost too much blood. Sorry about your pain, but the material has all been discarded. And it was the way he was talking to me was just like not empathetic at all, not sympathetic in the slightest to the fact that I had just lost a baby. It was all very like, okay, looks like all the tissue is out. We'll send you home. Do you want some pain medication? You should be good to go. Sorry for the wait. And that was it. It was honestly like a 2-minute conversation with this doctor after waiting 5 hours to be seen and just sitting there, like just basically waiting for it to be over. It was the worst moment of my life. I think just waiting there feeling like nobody understands this. Why does nobody care? I'm sitting here in a hospital where I feel like I should be safe. And I'm just sitting here going through a tragedy and I feel so alone, even though my mom was with me. I mean, I was in physical pain, emotional pain. Mentally, I'm just overwhelmed, and spiritually, I'm wondering where God is in all of this because should not be happening. I went home and grieved, and I would say like the year following that miscarriage was one of the hardest years of my life because it was a time in my faith where I had never been so taken off guard. Like I had so much faith for the pregnancy, believing like, you know what, Lord, I'm prepared. Like if I have to have another C-section, okay. If I have more complications, okay, I'll do it. Like this is what we do. Like we're moms, we're women, like woman up and just do it. But then when everything went wrong and just got worse and worse and worse, and I felt so abandoned by God, it really got me to a point in my faith where I came face to face with the pain and the doubts that it caused me to have and the fears that it caused me to have going forward. Like, do I talk about this? I mean, I had started telling people I was pregnant and now I had to tell people I wasn't. And people were asking me like, oh, when's your due date? And I'm like, actually, I just had a miscarriage. And you just don't prepare for that. And so it took me a very long time to process that. Finally, I would say a year later, I got to a point where I was doing okay. I had started going to counseling and I was seeing a psychiatrist and doing what I needed to do to work through the mental, emotional side of things and seeing doctors to help me figure out like the physical side. Is there something that caused this? Was it just a fluke thing? My OB was saying, it was probably just a fluke thing. I mean, this shouldn't happen again. There's no reason, you had no pre-existing issue. You've carried a healthy pregnancy to term, that kind of thing. So after a year, I finally felt okay, and we tried again, and we got pregnant. And I went to the doctor, and I had miscarried again. And at this point, I was like, okay, this is no longer a fluke thing. Why is this happening? And my OB told me the standard in the US, which is crazy to me. She said the standard in the US is after 3 miscarriages, then we would test for abnormalities, figuring out, is there something wrong hormonally? What's going on? You may be referred to an infertility specialist who can, work with more high risk pregnancies. To me, that was shocking. And I'm so thankful that I had a doctor who was willing to fight with me and advocate for myself. And we ran all of those labs after my second loss. So we started figuring out this was not a fluke thing. What's going on? There's obviously something in my body that's getting in the way of me being able to sustain a healthy pregnancy. Around that time, we realized that my hormones were just out of balance, and probably for pregnancies to come, what would probably help is getting on progesterone. So we had this game plan now where I felt a little better, but now the losses were more frequent than the healthy pregnancies. So to me, that had become the norm, and I was almost preparing myself for things to go wrong. But shortly after that, I got pregnant again. This was in 2022, and it was very quick, but I knew, like, I took a pregnancy test right away, and it was positive. It was faint, but it was there. And I just remember thinking, thank you, God. I believe this is our redemption story. Like, finally, we're seeing the miracle. We've done the tests. We know what we need to do. I fought for myself. I called my doctor, and I was like, hey, I know that I just took this pregnancy test, but I need to get in for labs immediately so we can check my progesterone levels. I need to get on progesterone. And they were like, okay, great. So I came in, it was the week of Thanksgiving, actually, in 2022. That Wednesday, I came in for labs, and they were going to get them back that Friday. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to worry about it. Nothing to worry about yet. So the next day was Thanksgiving. I remember we were driving to my husband's family, and it was just a few hours away. But on the way there, I started making a baby registry. Just in faith, I was like, this is it. I believe God. Like, I'm going to let myself get my hopes up a little bit. Started making a registry for this baby and letting myself dream about a future where we had another baby. While we were at Thanksgiving, I started bleeding. And the drive home that day was deleting the registry, on the phone with my doctor, trying to figure out if I needed to come in to be seen at the ER on Thanksgiving. My labs got in on Friday, and I came in for a recheck that Monday, and it had shown another loss, and my body was just not able to sustain the pregnancy. My progesterone was still too low. Even supplementing, I was able to get on progesterone right away that time. So all of that being said, it was a third miscarriage, and from there I was just really discouraged. And at the end of the year, I just remember praying, like, around New Year's Eve, and we had prayer and fasting in our church that January in 2023. And I just thought, okay, Lord, I want another baby. I believe, like, He had given me dreams about having a daughter, like a son and a daughter. And we had our son, and I believed that there was still this word from the Lord that we would have a daughter in our family, whether it was through adoption, fostering, having another baby. And I just remember praying, okay, Lord, I will try one more time. But if we have another loss, I'm done. I cannot do this again. Please take away the desire, and we'll pursue adoption. We'll pursue fostering. Just prepare my heart for that, because I cannot go through this again. I was preparing to go for my 5th pregnancy. A week later, I actually found out that I was pregnant with our 5th baby. I got my labs right away. I got on progesterone right away. I was seen right away. And I'm so grateful I had people praying with me, and a doctor who was fighting with me to make sure that we had everything that we could do on our side proactively ready to go. And the pregnancy stuck, and it was a baby girl. And I just remember, like, just feeling how, like, when you are living in the prayers that you have prayed for so long. And I just remember just not, like, being in total shock, but also just feeling like, thank you, Lord. Like, I knew this was coming. Like, there was just a little bit of me that was still holding on to the hope that He would keep His promise, and He did. So had this pregnancy. My 5th pregnancy was our daughter. And I started having complications in that pregnancy, which made me feel very afraid. I knew people who had lost babies. I mean, there's no guarantee, right? Like that you make it to term and you still have a perfect baby. So I was kind of holding my breath. Thankfully, she was okay. The complications were on my end. So I again developed cholestasis, which was so frustrating and discouraging, and started having other issues, just a whole string of things that were going wrong. I was in and out of the hospital towards the end of my 2nd trimester into the 3rd. And by the end of it, we just decided, okay, we're going to have to watch and wait because this baby is coming early. Like, there's no way I'll make it to term, but let's just try to keep this baby in there as long as she can to stay healthy and be ready. So at 34 weeks, I was in the hospital almost every day. I had low potassium. Had low blood sugar. My blood pressure was crazy, just all these things. And I was like, can we please just have this baby? I am just so done with this pregnancy, and I wanted to be excited. But at that point I was like, God, I thought this was supposed to be the beautiful redemption story and everything was going to be perfect. But right now it looks like everything's just falling apart. And at this point, like, can we just get to the good part of this where I am holding my baby in my arms? I remember the day that she was born. We were at 35 weeks, and we had woken up that morning. It was a Saturday, and we went to breakfast, and I just remember feeling really yucky, which was not new, but I was starting to feel like crampy. And with cholestasis, it's like your right upper quadrant pain where your liver is. And so I was like, ugh, maybe I'm just having a flare up with that or something's going on. At this point, my doctors told me, like, if it's anything, if you think it's going on, just come in to triage. I mean, they had an OB triage at our hospital, which was great. So I was like basically a frequent flyer. I'd be like, hey, it's me again. They're like, what are you in for today? So that Saturday I came in. My husband actually was going to shoot a wedding. He's a wedding photographer. So at noon that day, he left for his wedding. And I was like, it's fine. My parents are going to keep our son. Like, I'll just go to triage, just hang out there for a while we wait out the symptoms and figure out what's going on. So I go into the hospital by myself, and I'm waiting there, and they're like, can you feel the contractions? And I was like, contractions? They're like, yeah, you're actually in labor. And I was like, you're telling me what? I'm in labor? I had this weird condition called polyhydramnios where my body was making a ton of extra amniotic fluid. So basically at 35 weeks, my belly was big enough to be holding twins, but it was just my daughter and fluid. So I couldn't feel that I was having contractions. I could feel that there was something going on, but I didn't understand that I was in labor because I had never gone into labor with my son, So it was all new to me. So they were like, okay, well, we'll give you the steroid shot just in case you go into labor, make sure her lungs are okay, good to go. We'll keep monitoring baby. Thankfully, she was great. She was perfectly healthy and fine. And I am like updating my husband. I'm like, hey, looks like it's going to be fine. No baby tonight. They're saying like, we're just going to watch and monitor the contractions. I was starting to dilate, but barely. And they were just going to watch and see if I continued to dilate. Then we would need to get in there and do a C-section just to make sure that nothing got emergent if I did go into labor and she was still so little, and I was having all these issues. So 10 minutes later, the nurse came in and checked me. I had continued to dilate, and they're like, never mind, you're actually having this baby right now. So we're going to go prep an OR. And I was like, can I at least call my mom so I'm not here by myself? So I call my mom. I'm like, hey, surprise, I'm having the baby right now. Can you get to the hospital? They said they would wait for you to get here before they wheel me back. So they start prepping me for surgery. I'm like frantically hoping my mom will be there so I won't be alone in the operating room when I'm having this baby. Call my husband, who's an hour away at a wedding, and I'm like, hey, surprise, our baby's gonna be here like in 10 minutes. Can you get here? And he's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I'm working at this wedding. He ends up like giving his camera to somebody else who was working there, telling them how to work the camera so they could get the exit. It all worked out. Like by some miracle, he was able to get there, but not in time for her to be born. He got there right after she was born, which was really sad. But he made it. And right before midnight, our daughter was born via C-section. And I was so excited. And they were telling me, she looks great on the monitor. She's fine. Like they gave her the steroid shot. So hopefully she'd be able to breathe on her own after they delivered. I had my epidural. So I'm laying on the table for my C-section in the OR. They take her out. They lift her up to show her to me. And then they took her away to start like cleaning her up. We didn't hear her cry. So we're starting to get a little nervous. My mom's like, what's going on? Thankfully, one of the nurses was really nice, took my mom's phone to go and take some pictures of our daughter for me so that I could see her. And then they said, we're so sorry, we're taking her to the NICU. We'll update you when we can. Again, plans went out the window. I was told she would be fine, and now she's not. She's going to the NICU. I'm just laying there. And I had to lay there for a while because I had opted to get my tubes out. I was like, okay, I'm done being pregnant. My body is done. But unfortunately, that meant that I had to stay there on the table even longer. My husband wasn't there yet. He couldn't come see me. He couldn't see our daughter. We didn't know where she was. We didn't know what was going on. It felt like an eternity just laying there. And if you've had a C-section, you know, like that feeling of just helplessness where you can't move your body. You're literally paralyzed. And so I just felt so helpless. I was like, there's nothing I can do. I hope my baby's okay. Just like praying, God, please, please, please let our girl be okay. They finally got me ready to go. They were about to finish in the OR, and then I threw a massive clot. So they had to deal with that and then start prepping me to wrap up again. And then finally I was able to be wheeled out. My husband was able to meet us, and then they wheeled us into the NICU to meet our daughter. We saw her there. She was just hooked up to all the machines, and it was so hard to see that. Just going into it believing this was going to be our beautiful redemption story, and now we don't know if our baby is okay. And she wasn't able to breathe on her own, and her oxygen levels were just really unstable, and she wasn't able to nurse. She had a feeding tube and all those kinds of things to monitor her. So they walked us through all the paperwork in the NICU, and we got to sit with her for a minute, and then they wheeled me up to my room, and my husband went home to be with our son. And so the first night after having our daughter, I was alone in the hospital, and I couldn't do anything. I was still recovering from my epidural and C-section, and it was the hardest moment, just wishing I could hold my baby and feed her and be with her. And, you know, like after all of that trauma leading up to her, I just wanted to have her with me, and she wasn't there. And I felt so empty and sad, and plus all the other postpartum hormones that you're feeling, you know? So long story short, she was miraculously able to recover quickly. It's crazy because the condition I had, polyhydramnios with the extra fluid, they drained 5.5 liters of fluid out of my body during the C-section, which was just insane. But because of that condition, our daughter had extra room to grow, and she was a little bit bigger when she was born, which made her able to start recovering more quickly in the NICU, which was just miraculous. We're so grateful to God for that, like working out like crazy how it all connected. And she was able to come home later that week, and she's been healthy ever since. And she's almost a year old now, which is just crazy. But everything leading up to it just felt like one hit after another, and a lot. But yeah, it took me a long time to work through that and process through that, and finally feel like, okay, it's really happening. It's okay. I can take a breath. Like I can release this breath that I've been holding on to for so long. And sorry, that was the very long story with all the details,
It
but
was perfect.
that's how we got here.
Oh my gosh, I was like crying. I cried at multiple points. It was so good, Hannah. Oh my gosh. I have so many questions. I was taking notes, so we'll kind of circle back to some pieces. You said so many beautiful things too. I can tell you're a writer. I'm just like, gosh, she's amazing. One moment that I thought was so interesting was when you were talking about the ER experience with the doctor, and you said, I feel like I should be safe here. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that, of like just how you experienced even like that in your body. What did it look like for you to like experience that cognitive dissonance? Anything you want to share about that?
Okay, mama, have you ever felt that stirring to start a podcast? Maybe you felt that nudge in your heart and you've been sitting on the idea for a while, but it just feels really overwhelming and you don't know where to start. Trust me, I've been there. That was me for so long. And I felt so overwhelmed by how to begin, what I needed to make a successful podcast. And that's why I want to introduce you to my friend Kristen. She and her incredible team of other mamas specialize in helping moms just like you launch and grow podcasts with confidence. From one-on-one support to a team that's committed to your vision. With Kristen as your podcast coach, she will help make sure that your episodes get out consistently and create kingdom impact. Because here's the thing, your voice deserves to be heard, and she'll be there every step of the way to make it happen. So get started today. Just head over to www.podcastcoachingforkingdomentrepreneurs.com and take that first step toward making that dream happen.
That's a great question, and something I wish was talked about more, because when you're going through any kind of crisis pregnancy, high risk pregnancy, miscarriage, anything like that, there's not a special place where you can go for that. It's all just like general care most of the time. They send you to the ER. I mean, thankfully, with my daughter's pregnancy, we were at a hospital where they had a specific OB triage ER where I could be seen, and it was specific OB care. But outside of that, and all my other pregnancies, it was just very like standard care, like what you would get for anybody coming to an ER with like a cold or a broken arm or a heart attack, you know? So it was like, there's no one there that, at least in my experience, I will say there was no one there comforting me, asking if I was okay, asking if I needed privacy, if I needed a room or a space. And, you know, I get that they are busy and it's not like they can accommodate be above and beyond for one patient. But in that moment, I just wish that I had somebody that I could either talk to or have a moment to be by myself. I mean, I was sitting in a waiting room with people who had COVID, people who were there for other injuries, little kids running around. And I'm here, like, literally just bleeding out, having to wait for this elderly man to get out of the bathroom so I can get back in there and change my pad again. And I just felt so unseen in that. Like I had to wait to get through it before I could actually process what I was going through and start grieving it. By the time I was actually seen, and I mean, like I said, that was a 5-hour experience of just waiting to be seen, for someone to even tell me if I was okay. Like, do I need to go have a DNC? I'm like preparing. Am I hemorrhaging? Am I about to be wheeled up for a blood transfusion? Like, somebody tell me what I need to be anticipating. And it was so hard too, like being there with my mom. She was as helpful as she could be, but she had never experienced it either. So she was just sitting there and crying with me. And every now and then she would go to a nurse and be like, do you have any more pads? Like, do you have anything? Do you have some medicine you can give her, please? Like, she's in pain. And there was nothing that I could do. I mean, getting up and walking anywhere was painful. And I just remember feeling like I want to be somewhere I can be taken care of, but I didn't feel taken care of. I felt just like a number on a list waiting to be seen. And I know that's the experience of so many women who have miscarriages or pregnancies where they are with bad news going into this. It's like, well, we'll see you when you can. I mean, there's a lot of other people on the list and it's not emergent at this point. You feel like it's urgent, but to them, they're like, well, there's other people who are more urgent. So you're just going to have to wait. But to me, I was like, I just want this to be over. I just want to go home. If I had known I'd be waiting here for 5 hours and they were going to tell me I was fine, I would have just stayed at home and cried in bed, you know? So I just felt so uncomfortable, like grieving something so personal in a room full of other people that I didn't know. Like, strangers were watching me go through one of the most horrible moments of my life. And I'm sure there were other people there, you know, who felt that too, like going through really awful moments. But you just feel so alone in that. And I just really wanted somebody to say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss, and not talk to me like it was science or that it was just my body releasing tissue. The words that he said to me were just so sterile. And I felt like it was not a human kind of interaction where I felt emotionally engaged with in the slightest. And so that was really, really hard for me because it just felt so vulnerable going through that, just surrounded by strangers and surrounded by people who were not on the same level as me, like understanding the grief that I was feeling, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
it totally makes sense. Another piece that I was curious about that kind of relates is you said at some point, I'm not going to say the exact same words, but you basically said at some point you were like, oh, this is trauma. And so I'm curious about that. When did you realize, like, I'm going to name this experience as trauma? And what was that like, getting comfortable with that idea? Because I know for me, it was like, there was a point where I was like, oh, I guess this was traumatic. And it's actually helpful to say that, you know, instead of trying to not, you
Uh,
know?
yeah, that's a good point. I think, you know, going through my crazy pregnancy with my son, that didn't register for me as trauma. That was like, oh, I'm really disappointed. I'm really bummed that didn't work out how I hoped it would. That's sad, you know. But when I went through my first miscarriage, that to me was like, this is shocking, first of all. Like, the shock of it was so unexpected. And then also the waiting period after that. Like, I had to sit in that shock, waiting for the thing that I was shocked about to actually happen. To me, that felt traumatizing because I couldn't get my body to do what it was supposed to do. And I was just waiting for this release, like the physical part of it. And then I felt like my grieving had to wait because I was just waiting. Is it going to happen today? It's going to happen today, for 2 weeks before my body actually started, like miscarrying. I would say during that process, I was like, this this is trauma. Like, I cannot even process what I'm feeling yet because I'm still waiting for this thing to happen. And living in the limbo was just horrible. Like, just that waiting and feeling like this sucks. It sucks, but it hasn't even happened yet. Then it happens and it just basically compounded on top of what I was already feeling because now I was actually experiencing the thing that was grieving and waiting for, if that makes sense. So to me, that was just like, whoa, like it just took me so off guard being in that room where there was no heartbeat, being told we lost our baby, and it being literally the last thing I expected to hear. Like, there was no preparation for that. So yeah, I would say the shock of that, and then the period where I just didn't know what to do with my emotions and processing that was traumatic for me.
Yeah. Another piece of your journey that I feel like was really hopeful, even just hearing you talk about it, I was like, "Oh, she's such a badass." But you were talking about this journey of advocacy, which I feel like you're in a cool place because I've only had one pregnancy and one birth. And so I'd love to just hear that process a little bit more for you of like, how did you go from this place of like, wow, this is really, this first pregnancy, first birth was disappointing. And then you're moving into these other experiences and loss. But how did you go from that to like learning how to advocate yourself, like within the medical system, even like with family and friends? I don't know if that was a part of it for you, like spiritually. Yeah, just can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a huge piece, and I wish more moms felt empowered to do that. I think for me, having my first experience with my midwife, even though I didn't have a home birth, she was so foundational for my understanding of childbirth and pregnancy because she taught me about the choices I had. She was very, like, the way that she presented information to me was like, this is what I would recommend, but these are your choices. Here's why this is a good option, and here's why this is a good option. And as we were preparing to transfer my care to the hospital, she did the same thing. She was like, in the hospital, they're going to ask you about this. Here's why this is a good option, and here's why this is a good option, but ultimately you get to choose. So having that be my experience with my first pregnancy and just having somebody walk me through that, kind of hold my hand, and not making me feel shame if I chose one thing or another, but saying you get to choose what's right for you. There's not a right or wrong. It's your body, it's your child, it's your pregnancy, it's your experience. A lot of it is outside of our control, but here's what you do get to choose. And that made me feel very secure, very safe, very empowered, and very at peace with my body in the pregnancy, knowing that, if I get to this situation, here are my options and I get to choose. And if somebody doesn't support that, then, like, they're not the one that's in control. Like, someone can say they don't recommend that, but ultimately I still get to choose unless there's a medical reason why it should be a certain way. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so when I found the OB that I went to for my pregnancies until my daughter, she was somebody where from the beginning I had asked her, I was like, okay, what's your thought on natural birth? Like, if I came in with ideas of like, I would love to do it as naturally as I can, what do you think about that? And that was like at our first appointment with my second pregnancy. And she was like, I'm happy to do whatever you want to do. If there's a medical reason why we shouldn't, I'll let you know. But for the most part, I'm happy to support your wishes for this pregnancy and the childbirth experience and postpartum. And I felt really supported in that. So I think, first of all, I just went into my second pregnancy looking for a provider that would give me that same sense of someone who would let me choose and then would support me in that. I felt very supported by my OB. And that's why I stuck with her through all of those. And it made the whole experience, even when we got to the complications with our daughter, made me feel very safe because the way she handled my miscarriages was phenomenal. I mean, she had other patients to see, but she stayed and cried with me when she told me about our first loss. She personally called me to check on me multiple times after my losses, asking if there's anything that she could do. And so I felt from the beginning that I did have a say in my experience because of the relationship that I formed with my provider. And I think that's really critical. I would say for a woman who's maybe, if it's your first pregnancy or if it's not, if you're looking for a provider that you feel will give you the option and like support you in your ability to choose what you want, that is key. Like if you don't feel like you have a choice, consider options, whether it's like by bringing in a doula or somebody who can help you understand your options. Because some doctors, they don't even think to tell you your options, they just walk you through the process. And a lot of moms, they think that's just the way it goes. It's like, oh, I get pregnant, I go to the hospital, I do this, this, and this. If I'm not, ready to go by this date, I get induced. Like a lot of women don't even know there's other options, but there are. And so I would say, whether it's through your OB or a midwife or whatever route you choose, bring someone into the process with you who can help you understand your options and choices. Because that was huge for me. If my midwife hadn't done that, I wouldn't have even known that I had the ability to advocate for myself later on with my OB. And then later on, when she told me about the statistics that most doctors don't run extra testing after your third miscarriage, I was like, absolutely not. I don't want to go through this again. Why should any woman have to go through this 3 times before they get any answers? Thankfully, again, my doctor told me that. And she said, you have options. Do you want to go ahead and run these labs? And I said, yes. She said, we'll run everything we can then. We'll run everything you want to run. And, obviously, if it's within your financial scope, like you can do that. You have the power to do that. But I felt very supported saying, I want to know what's going on. Like if I didn't know, for me personally, what was causing my losses, we believe was the low progesterone. If we didn't know that was the cause, who knows how many more losses I would have had because my body couldn't sustain it on its own. But because we knew that was the issue, I knew as soon as I was pregnant my 4th time, I called my OB and I said, I'm pregnant, get me on progesterone. And she immediately sent in the prescription without even seeing me yet. We made the appointment, but she sent in the prescription right away. So I think just a couple things like understanding, being educated on my options, but then also having a provider who respected that when it came time for me to make a choice, and then just knowing what my options were so that we could run the extra tests or the options for delivery, that kind of thing. I just felt like at this point, no one else is going to fight for me. And I think part of that was the ER experience as well, because if I didn't speak up for myself, like no one else is going to. So I just was like, I'm done going through this. If there's a way that I can change my experience, I want to do that.
I love that. Yeah, it's so empowering. Another piece that I want to touch on is just this idea of shame and body image too, because I feel like they're really wrapped up in each other. And I know you and I are both in similar worlds online too. So for me, it was super hard because I also planned for a natural birth. And then to shift gears, it was really hard because I kept seeing all these messages online, especially from Christians, of your body was made to do this. You were built to birth. Like you were made for this. So I'm curious, what was that like for you? How do you get past that piece of shame, and also with your faith too? How do you integrate that in your healing journey, I guess?
That was one of the hardest pieces for me, Molly, because from my pregnancy with my son, my first pregnancy, going from that supernatural childbirth book and believing for this beautiful, pain-free, natural home birth, beautiful, miraculous story to, okay, well, all my plans are out the window. Now I'm just hoping for the best. Now all I want is a healthy baby. It really adjusted my expectations in that because it is so easy to feel shame. I remember there was a moment where I felt like a failure because I wasn't going to be able to do my home birth. And then my midwife talked me through that. And I had a couple other people in my corner also who had been, supporting me in the pregnancy. I was actually in a small group at the time with a pastor from my church who was leading a small group of us who were pregnant for the first time moms. And so she was like, you know what? It's okay. Just basically helped me come to the realization that I can't control it. But really, what does that matter? The outcome we really want with pregnancy and childbirth is a healthy baby, right? So whether or not the rest of the details work out beautifully the way that you want them to, like if we still get the same outcome, we can thank God for that. The rest of the pieces may carry disappointment. It may be painful. It may be hard to let go of some of those things that you planned. But we also have to hold it with an open hand and just trust that God knows, even when it doesn't go the way we want to. Like at the end of the day, for me, I was like, my son is here. He's healthy. Really, that's all I wanted. So I'm okay that the rest of it didn't go as planned. I processed through that in a different time, but I didn't let the shame take root for me because I realized through the help of those people who are around me, what is that going to do for me? Feeling shame that it didn't go the way I wanted it to. And what difference did it make? And I came to this moment actually where I realized, you know what? My mom never tells my birth story. And I'm actually okay with that. Like I don't ever hear my friends' moms telling their birth stories. It's a beautiful thing to share with our friends, but our generation has really romanticized the birth story. But at the end of the day, like I don't even know the details of my birth story, and I'm okay with that. There's no one that I want to go and tell my personal birth story to. It doesn't really make a difference. You know what I mean? And so for me, I had to kind of detach myself from that because in the moment, I wanted this beautiful story to tell because I somehow thought that it was a testimony to God's faithfulness or his beautiful plan that I had this perfect pregnancy and childbirth. When in reality, the beauty of it is the miracle of life. And I was pregnant and now I have a beautiful, healthy child. And the rest of it, there's no use holding shame in because what does that change for me? And so I just had to get really real about that. Like, there's nothing I can change about it. So why should I feel bad about it? And then with the faith piece as well, that was a big, big piece that I had to work through after my first miscarriage because that's when I got real with God about, I would say with my son, it was getting real with myself about my expectations. Because I don't know if you've heard someone say, my therapist actually recently was telling me the space between our expectations and reality is where disappointment, anxiety, depression, trauma lives. So I just had to like bring myself down a little bit and realize, okay, yes, I have these plans. I have these desires. I have these dreams, these goals, the way I hope my pregnancy and childbirth will go. But at the end of the day, the reality is I hope for a healthy baby at the end of this. So I had to bring it down a little bit so that I didn't get caught in the middle space between like, I got what I prayed for. This was the biggest thing with my pregnancy with my daughter, actually. It was like, I got what I prayed for, but it didn't look like I wanted it to. So is God still good? And I had to wrestle with that for a long time. But with my miscarriages, I think that was the time in my faith where I really got honest with God about my frustrations and the doubts that I had. Because there were moments where I was like, two miscarriages, God, really? Like, I'm believing you for life. I believe life comes from you. I'm making all these spiritual declarations over my body, over my womb, over my pregnancy. I have people praying for me. What's going on? And the reality is, we just live in a broken world and our bodies are not perfect. Like we're in a broken world. Unfortunately, like the effects of sin just happen to our bodies. And I don't have complete control over that. But the biggest question that I wrestled through during that time was, even if I don't get what I want, is God still good? And I had to detach the outcome from what I believed about God. Because for me personally, I was holding on to this hope that it was like, God, when I get this baby and I have this testimony of your goodness and that you answer prayers and you keep your promises, then I'll know you're good. Then my faith will be raised to a whole new level. But it didn't happen that way at all. And so I had to come to the conclusion in my own spirit and my own soul that God is good, detached from my circumstances and detached from the outcome and detached from the process of how we get the outcome. Because for me, like I said, in my pregnancy with my daughter, there were so many moments where I was like, I have cholestasis again. Like, this was supposed to be the beautiful miracle redemption story. Like, this is finally my rainbow baby and it should be perfect and beautiful. And I just remember God saying, this is the redemption story. Just because it's not perfect, it doesn't mean it's not. And that was a moment for me that I really had to just let it sink in because I was like, oh, I have put so much of my faith in the outcomes and things going the way I want them to that I didn't realize I wasn't keeping God in his place that was separate from the way things work out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It makes total sense. I know we're kind of close with time here, and I want to be respectful of your time too. So, but yeah, I have like one or two more questions that I'm like, oh, it's so
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
One part that I heard you talking about that I'm kind of focusing on with the faith stuff as well is just this idea of fear. And so I've written about it a little bit of some of the pieces that I might share, but I heard you talk about being afraid in future pregnancies. And I feel like I hear that a lot in conversations. And one thing that I'm kind of learning, I feel like, is that I do actually think we should be afraid. And so I'm
Mm,
curious if you agree with that and what you think about that, because I think that there's like this level of fear and reverence towards God that grows in pregnancy and birth. And like being okay with the
mhm.
fact that like he's holy, he's set apart, you know? And I feel like you were kind of touching on that. And like that is a little scary. So I'm wondering, one, if you agree with that idea, and then also just your thoughts on it.
I love that you brought that up, and I agree with you. I actually read the book, oh gosh, Breaking Intimidation, I think is what it's called, by John Bevere. I read it years ago in college, but he differentiates between being afraid, as in like having that fear and reverence for God, versus being intimidated by the enemy or potential of bad circumstances happening. And to me, what I realized in my pregnancy was I have two choices here with my pain. And this is what I stand by. And I tell people all the time, I feel like in our pain, we have two choices. We can either let our fear drive us deeper into the Lord and make us more aware of our need and dependence on Him. Like, we can't do it without Him. Life is not sustained without Him. I agree. I think that there is a level of realization like, oh my goodness, Lord, I need you in pregnancy like nothing else. And I think that's good and healthy. Like, we need to remember that it's not up to us, it's not about us. Like, we need Him. But also, the intimidation side for me was a dangerous territory that for me during my miscarriages, I had to be wary of, because if I got really intimidated and fearful and giving into the lies that the enemy was trying to tell me, that was where we had a problem. Because if it was like, I'm afraid, God, like, I really don't know what to expect. Like, Lord, I'm depending on you. I surrender this fear and I'm trusting you. That's healthy and good. That grows our faith. Like, I feel like we can't grow our faith without that healthy sense of fear. But if we are afraid and intimidated by the enemy trying to trick us into believing lies, that's where we get stuck. Because to me, for a while, I was believing maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not good enough to be a mom. I'm not a good enough mom to have another baby. Maybe I'm being punished for something. Maybe I just don't deserve this. Maybe this is just, maybe I'm a failure. All of these things that were lies. That's like, that you just spiral so quickly with that. That's the kind of fear and intimidation that is just not good, not healthy, doesn't lead anywhere good. Like, it gets bad real quick. And that, I think, is the unhealthy side of fear. But I agree with you. I do think that there's a healthy level of fear that draws us into a deeper dependence on the Lord. And that's where faith grows and exists.
Ugh, so good. Oh my gosh, I could talk to you all day. But okay, this is my last question. It's a quick and easy one. And you were already kind of talking
Okay.
about this, but what makes a good mom?
Oh my gosh. I get so emotional about this because I I was the girl that was growing up and I was like, yeah, I'll be a mom someday. Like, I'll get married, I'll be a mom. But I wasn't ever the girl that was like, I can't wait to be a mom. I can't wait to have babies. Like, that wasn't me. I'm just a high achieving person. And I always have just been so passionate about my work. I didn't know how motherhood would fit into that. And so having my son, for me, it took me a while to find my natural rhythm. And I operate a lot differently than the Instagram mom that I saw. Like, I'm not ashamed to say I'm not the Pinterest mom. I don't do perfect arts and crafts with my kids every day. I don't feel called to homeschool. I I love being a mom, but it took me a while to feel like it came, quote, naturally to me. But what I have learned in that, which kind of circles back to shaking off the shame, is I have to stop measuring my motherhood, like how good of a mom I am, based on what every other mom around me is doing. Because if I know in my heart that I am making decisions for my children based on my love for them and my desire for them to be happy and healthy and safe, I'm doing it right. That's it. And it kind of goes back to what my midwife was teaching me. She gave me that agency, these are my options. This one is good because this. This one is good because this. And as moms, we have those decisions every single day, And there's no perfect formula for being a mom, right? So at the end of the day, for me, what makes me feel good and capable as a mom is knowing that I'm making decisions based on the love I have for my kids and my desire to have the best for them. And sometimes I get it wrong, but I don't feel bad about that. Like I can quickly recover because I know my intent behind that decision, even if it wasn't the best choice, was because I loved my kid. And so I learn from that and I get back up and move on. And that, I think, for me, like, keeps the shame at bay. I still have hard days. I still have mom guilt days. But for the most part, I feel like if a mom can just really give herself permission to choose based on what she believes is best for her babies, you can't really go wrong, because even when you make a wrong choice, you get to learn from that and keep growing into your motherhood.
Oh, so good. You crushed it, obviously. I'm like,
I love this. Thanks so much for having me, Molly. I love that you're doing this. I feel like as I was telling my story, I was like, wow, I'm so thankful you're creating space for this, because how many moms have these stories but don't have anywhere to process them?
yeah.
So thank you.
It's so cool. I'm so glad you could do it too, because I obviously, like, my story doesn't encompass everyone's, but I feel like the more that I hear, I'm like, oh my goodness, I know so many people who are going to hear like a part and be like, wait, that happened to me, And so I just feel like it's so cool because it's giving voice to the voiceless. That's like the scripture that keeps coming to mind for me. So Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune in to another episode of the Byword Show. I love having you here, and your support truly means the world to me. If you enjoyed this episode, would you leave a quick review? It really helps our community grow and reach more women. If you want more, you can shop my books, Waking Up, Living Open, and Love Is, on Amazon, and be sure to sign up for my email list so you always get the latest news. I can't wait to chat again soon, but in the meantime, be sure to come hang out with me on social media, and remember, I'm cheering you on.